Thank you very much. Me and Rob have become such good friends that we now dress alike. Same shirt, same pants. So, you know, there's something we need to do about that. For people who don't know, I have had a checkered career, so I've done lots of things. The book I wrote called Making of a Beggar came out of what I'm seeing in society, which is how we seem to all have our hands out to somebody else to either fix our problems or to give us what we want or what we need or what we think we deserve. We're losing the value of earning things ourselves. And that's not everybody, and that's probably not people in this room, but I'm talking about in general in society. I've spent 20 years working with homeless people. So I started off over 20 years ago working at the council. I was in charge of Manchester City Centre, looking at reducing crime and disorder. A little topic that came under my field was rough sleeping, begging and street drinking, because that was all classed as antisocial behaviour, so that's where I first got involved in that. And then I left the council and I set a charity up working with young people, trying to stop them getting involved in crime and antisocial behaviour. And after a couple of years we expanded the charity and we started looking at rough sleepers and beggars in Manchester City Centre. So a lot of things I want to talk about is the experience from that. So I've got over 2 decades of experience of working with people who beg for a living, beg as their culture, and beg as their way of life. But I'm not going to just talk about those individuals who are broken, who are mainly drug addicts, who have mental health issues, and have been let down over decades by many of our state services to get to such a point that they sit on a street corner on a cold wet pavement with a paper cup just for money for drugs, because we're beginning to copy that behaviour, and I'm going to get into that today. So to be a good beggar in any context, you need a good story. It's called a beggar's narrative. No one's going to give you something if they don't feel pity for you. That's a string you need to pull on someone's heart, for anyone to give you something for nothing. It's called a beggar's narrative. Let me give you the best example of that I can give. So about 12 years ago, I'd set up the charity. We set up the project within it about looking at beggars and rough sleepers in the city centre. And we met this gentleman on the top of Deansgate, and we got talking to him. So all my projects we do with charities based on the streets. So we sit down on the street corner with this person begging, going, "How are you today? What can we do to help you?" And this gentleman said, "Well, I've had this conversation before, mate. People like you come here all the time asking me what I want and what can you do for me? And the answer is, you never do anything." I said, no, we're different. We're going to do something for you, we'll help you. What's your story? Well, I've been living on the streets now for several years. I can't get accommodation because I've got a dog. And the council's tried to help me and they're just useless. I used to work for the council, they are useless, so I bought that straight away. I said, right, we've got all your details now. This took several sessions because he said, I don't want to go into all in one go because I've had this before. It's traumatic, me keep telling my story. So we picked over several weeks. We got his story, we said to him, right, we're going to go to the council and we're going to sort you out, mate. Is that okay? He went, yeah, if you can. So I went to the council and they went, no idea who you think you are, Nick. You don't work here anymore. We can't talk to you about anybody. Have you got a signed agreement off this guy that he gives you permission to talk to us on his behalf? And we went, I'll get one. Took another week to find him. Went for templates online, got a template of a consent form. He signed it. I now had consent to speak about him to the council. Went to the council and went, right, let's have a chat. So I went, go on. His surname was Jones. So we sat down with the council managers from the homeless team and they said, right, Nick, you've got consent, great. The gentleman you're representing is not homeless. He's got a 2-bedroom house in Salford. 1 minute. Yep, and there's not even in rent arrears. It's all paid for by council tax in Salford. He lives with his partner. Yep, they're still living together. He is a heroin addict. We know he's a heroin addict because we've worked with him for 17 years. Other councils have worked with him for 17 years. He's never spent a day on the streets. And he tells you he's got a dog. I went, yeah. Have you ever seen a dog? No. Because he hasn't got a dog. And I sat there thinking, Jones is a common name. Maybe I've got the wrong David Jones. Maybe there's two David Jones. And they're thinking of the other David Jones. So I got up and went, no problem, we'll sort this out. So we found him on the streets a few days later, begging. He's always begging. Went up to him and said, right, just spoke to the council, and his face went. I went, and they've said to me these things, and as I'm talking to him, puts his coat on, starts standing up, and I went, and he goes, turns around and he goes, just fuck off, and walks away. That was when I realised there was something called a beggar's narrative. He hooked, line and reeled me in with a story that was believable, that pulled at my heartstrings, that the council's incompetent, which they are, and that's how he attracted donations into his paper cup. You can't get donations in your paper cup unless there's someone holding you back. Because if there's no one holding you back, then we don't feel like giving. Because we don't feel you're a victim. And I'm going to get that into a minute. But there's different types of beggars. I was a beggar. I was a bloody good beggar. I was a professional beggar. I was a beggar for the charity I created. How do you think we got our funds? I had a fantastic beggar's narrative. I would sit down at charity balls on tables with business people and I'd go, oh, thank you for the free tickets, a couple of drinks. What does your business do? Oh, what do you do? Oh, I work for a charity. I run a charity. Oh, what sort of charity? And then I had a spiel about how we're working on the streets, which was, everything I said was true. How we're working on the streets, we're stopping kids getting into a life of crime. Not because we feel sorry for these kids, but because I want these kids not to burgle your house, not to rob your mum, not for you to pay taxes, higher taxes, to keep them on benefits or in jail. And I would twist it to make sure they knew there was a benefit, a personal benefit for us helping these kids. And I got loads of money off these people. It was begging. It was a narrative. I call it good begging. And what I did with the money was exactly what I said I would do with the money. There's a difference to people sat on the streets. They're raising money purely for drugs. Purely for drugs. If they were honest and said that's what I was doing, you'd have a choice then to donate or not. But when people tell you I'm saving up for a B&B because they're now lying. That's what I disagree with. So we all beg. Animals beg. If you've got a dog, you know animals beg. You're trying to eat your tea and there's a dog next to you with his mouth wide open. All sorts. It's human nature. The biggest beggars, really, are babies. Because they beg off us for years and years and years. It's a human trait. That's why we feel sorry for people. That's why we do these things. To have a good story relies on different things. You can use props. So we got this guy off the streets a couple of decades ago. It was December and we knew there was a spare place in a hostel. We were working with a guy and we said, we can get you in a hostel today. And he went, I'll take it. We got him straight off the street into a hostel. Now that's the easy bit. The hard bit is keeping him in the hostels. That's the hard bit. So we'd go around every couple of days to make sure he's okay in the hostel, that there isn't any problems, because if there's any problems, let's nip them in the bud now. If you're falling out with the staff, let's nip that in the bud because we don't want to find you on the street again next week. You'll have to start all over again. Let's keep you in the hostel. That's the prevention work we're really bad at as a society. So we're trying to do that. Turn up at the hostel and we are there and we're speaking to the care workers in the hostel and they said, oh, let's call him Jimmy. Oh, well, Jimmy's in the kitchen, he's doing some arts and crafts. And that's fine. I used to think arts and crafts was a pink, fluffy load of rubbish when I first found out that that was what they used to do with people who are suffering from mental health or people suffering from homelessness. But when you see it, you understand why. They're actually being creative. They're doing something empowering. They create something that is a work of art, maybe not a very good work of art, but it's a work of art that they then get to keep that then they take to their room and put on the wall. They've lost all their belongings, they've got nothing, they've got no knickknacks, they've got nothing from the family. But when they create something, it means something to them. So that's why we do arts and crafts with people like that. I get that. Went to the kitchen, him and another guy from the hostel was at the kitchen table, and they're intense working on whatever they're working on. And it's like, that's great, you're doing something. As we got closer, the lad we were working with, have you seen this? Pulls out this cardboard, big piece of cardboard, and it says, homeless at Christmas, please help. And he's got £1, $1.99 fairy lights, battery powered, and he's intervened them round the corners. He's painted holly and ivy. Best sign I've ever seen. The best sign. And we said to him, but you're not homeless at Christmas. That's a lie. And he went, and it just hit him. He was proud to show us his sign because he'd spent hours on it and he was proud of it, and he should be proud of it. It was a fantastic piece of art, but it was a lie. A beggar's narrative. You always need a story to be a good beggar. And then let me give you an example of someone who wasn't sat on the street begging. So a friend of a friend, I believe this story to be true. A friend of a friend said to me, have you heard this, Nick? A friend of mine, their family dog is really poorly. And it's going to cost them £2,500 for the vet bill. And the kids are really upset. I get that. I don't like dogs, but I get it. They've set up a fundraising page and they've now raised £3,500. Fantastic. They've told the truth. My dog's sick. Here's photos of the family dog playing with the kids, pulling on heartstrings. Absolutely fine. It's all truthful. And we're going to spend the money on fixing the dog. I said, not a problem with any of that. Then my friend says, but let me tell you this bit. Once one of their friends saw that, they contacted him and said, I've got a vet down the corner who does extremely cheap work on animals if you're on benefits. And I know you're not on benefits, but I am. I'll take your dog in and I'll get your dog seen to, and it'll cost you hardly anything. So the person took the dog in and they had whatever needed doing, it got done, and it was less than £120. Following week, the family booked all-inclusive holiday to Disney World in Paris with the rest of the money. Now, up to that point, everything they did was fine. They told people what they want the money for, and they got the money, but then they got it done cheaper. In my idea, they should have given all the money to that vet so he could then help other people who can't afford vet bills, but they didn't. And the reason why they didn't, my belief is, because once you start taking handouts, you start seeing the people who give you the money as suckers, or they have too much, and deserving. You can twist it where you will believe what you want to believe to keep what you now have. There's no honour in that, but that's what people do. That's what begging does. It destroys you. It chips away at your self-worth, your self-respect. The more handouts you take, the less of a person you are. That doesn't mean we don't need charity sometimes, we don't need help sometimes, because we do. I was brought up on benefits as a child. But I tell people now, take charity if you need it. Teach your children not to need it and they won't have to accept it. But we've got to a stage now where it's becoming socially acceptable to have your hand out, especially to the state. I remember, again, a decade ago, somebody texted me, tweeted to me, said, Nick, have you heard of something called the Cartman Triangle? And I thought, oh, is that something from South Park? There's a little character in South Park called Cartman. And it wasn't, turns out it's some guy in the 60s, university lecturer, who came up with a theory, and it's now called the Cartman Drama Triangle. And what this person said, that every drama in society, and this applies for me now with begging, every drama needs 3 players, 3 roles. You need a victim, you need a hero, and you need a persecutor. And if we look around our society now, especially films, movies, everything like that. They're there. If you look at hero, villain, victim. Disney, have a look at The Handsome Prince, The Wicked Stepmother, The Damsel in Distress. Look at Westerns, the good, the bad and the ugly. Look at Star Wars. We've got Luke, Darth Vader and Obi-Wan. There's always a victim, someone vulnerable. There's always someone evil who has nefarious reasons and ideas and aims. And there's always the hero that we want to be when we hear the story. That's the Cartman triangle. I've spoken to lots of people around the begging. And the best example I can give you, if you go online on Facebook groups, there'll be 1 million Facebook groups online who are going out every day, every week, feeding people sat on the streets. And they think they're amazing. They think they're Gandhi. They think they're Mandela. Look at us taking a selfie with this dysfunctional person. Aren't I amazing? And the comments prove their point. You are amazing. If we had more people like you in the world, there'd be no problems. I wish I was like you. But you ask them one question. That person was sat on the street homeless yesterday. You've given them a sandwich today and the homeless tomorrow. What difference have you made? And the answer is you've made no difference whatsoever. Apart from it's made you feel pink and fluffy. That's all you've done. Because there was no benefit to that. I've had these conversations with Facebook groups. They don't like it. Because they do believe they're doing the right thing. The answer is, these people will starve to death if it wasn't for me. No one has ever starved on the streets of the UK. No one has ever starved to death on the streets. You can get free food in Manchester City Centre, something like 15 hours a day, 7 days a week, if you know where to go at what hours. No one is hungry on the streets. Again, it's part of the narrative of, look at me, I'm a victim, I'm being held back, someone's persecuting me. Who's persecuting you? It's always an entity, it's always the council. Yeah. It's always children's services took my children away for no reason. I've worked with children's services. They hardly take anyone's children away because they don't want to, it costs too much. If social services take your children away, there's a reason. The reason might be wrong. I'm not saying they don't make mistakes. They probably do make mistakes, but there's a reason. We always need to blame somebody else for what for us not taking our personal responsibility on that. The victim, it's not my fault. I know all these things have gone wrong in my life. I know I've been arrested for dealing cocaine. I know I've been arrested for violence. I know I've been arrested for sexual assault. I know I've stabbed my husband. I know I've abused my kids. It's not my fault. I have a reason why those things happened. We all can find reasons why things happen. We can always push the blame on somebody else. And again, our society, that's what we're always doing. It's always someone else's fault. It's never our fault. Because if we admit it's our fault, that means we then have to do something about it. It then means we have to look deep down inside and say to ourselves, what is wrong with my character, or my culture, or my belief system, or my morality that makes me act like that or do that? They're difficult conversations to have, because once you have those conversations, you've got to find solutions. And finding solutions is the easy bit, but then acting out those solutions is the hard bit. It's easy to go, not my fault, their fault, society's fault. And we're all guilty of this all the time at certain levels in our lives. Me included, I don't ever say that the reason why I know these things is because I can see all the times I've done this in my life, which I outline in the book. If I go into this now, that'll be 2 hours of me telling you all my mistakes in my life, where I blamed other people. But all that's detailed in the book. There's a chapter in the book where I wasn't sure if I was going to publish, because I know my mum's going to read the book, and I was ashamed if mum reads that chapter. And I thought, no, I've got to put that chapter in, And hopefully she'll die before she reads it. Because she's always so. There's something called learnt helplessness. So learnt helplessness is a state we have in society with certain individuals that they cannot look after themselves, they cannot look after their own life or be the captain of their own life. And part of the reason is the state has always stepped in and done the things they should do themselves. And eventually we've made them helpless because they don't know how to fix small problems. They'll always put their head in the sand because I can't cope, I don't know what to do. And then everything hits crisis point. The state steps in. A good example was a couple of years ago during COVID when the footballer Rashford has a campaign, we need to feed people's children during the 6 weeks holidays. One of the most disgraceful campaigns I've ever seen for many reasons. The first reason is it made him feel pink and fluffy and he got an MBE out of it. I'm sure that's not why he did it. I'm sure he believed what he was saying, but he's a footballer, he's just not a very intelligent person. He's had a privileged life, he's a multi-millionaire. He wasn't always privileged. I think he was raised in Withington, Moss Side, single parent household, but his answer to all that is the state needs to do more. My answer is your dad should have done more for you and your mum should have been able to pick a better partner. If you want to look at where your poverty came from, that's it. Your mum picked the wrong partner for you and your dad's a waste of space. If you want to have a campaign, that's what your campaign should be, not the state feeding other people's children. Because that's not the state's job. It's our job as parents. Because what's next? We're sending social workers around to brush your children's teeth in the morning because you won't brush their teeth for them or make them do it. Where does it stop? And it stops where the state has full control over you and your children. I've worked for the state. It's incompetent. Parents are incompetent as well. But I'll tell you what, I would always go for the love of a parent over the best intentions of the state. The state don't love your children. They're just trying to manage them. At least a parent, even the most dysfunctional parent, loves their child, might not be able to be a good parent, and might not be able to get the child what the child needs, and is failing the child, definitely. But even a failing parent loves their child. They just don't know how to be a better parent. That's where our focus as a state should be. Getting people to be better parents, giving them help and support, not taking over the role of a parent. And that's what's called learned helplessness, and we need to stop it. There's nothing wrong in failing in life. We've all failed at something in this room. But what we did was stand back up, brush ourselves down, put our best foot forward and try again. And you may have failed again. Nothing wrong in that. I failed loads of things. I failed my English O-level 5 times. For people who don't know what O-levels are, they're GCSEs in the olden days. 5 times I failed my English O-level. Did I give up? No, I was embarrassed. My friends all passed them. I just couldn't pass it until I got a good teacher who went, Nick, these are all your mistakes. I corrected them, I passed. It's not about giving up. We all make mistakes. It's about standing up again and trying and trying and trying. Nothing wrong in failing. That's how we learn. But we're allowing people to fail, and we're allowing them to understand that you don't have to try again because we're just going to look after you. We're going to do a piss poor job at it, and you're going to have a terrible life, and the pain you suffer, you're going to have to self-medicate with illegal drugs, but that's all fine. Instead of giving people the power and the responsibility to improve their own lives instead of relying on others, we need to avoid learned helplessness. And then there's something called unintended consequences, and this is something we never talk about as politicians, as government, and as people. Every action has a reaction somewhere else. We all think Middle Eastern dictators are bad. let's get rid of them. Well, ask the people of Libya and Iraq, how did that go for them? Yeah, the dictator's gone, but millions of people have died. Nobody expected that because we didn't look at unintended consequences. Let me round up what I was talking before, because I want questions, because it's not about just listening to me. So, for me, really what I've been talking about is a lack of personal responsibility in our lives, as a nation, as individuals. The best example I can give you is a black American actor called Terry Crews. You all know who Terry Crews is?
Yeah.
He's the big, muscly, bald-headed guy who's been in Expendables. He was in White Chicks. He's a fairly famous American actor.
Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
Pardon?
Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
Brooklyn Nine-Nine. He tells this story about when he worked on the first Expendables film. So he got into acting by mistake. He turned up to pick his friend up from a Denzel Washington production, and he was sat in a car waiting for his mate to come out of the studios to pick him up, and the director or someone said, "You're a big black guy. We need a big black guy for the scene tomorrow." And no speaking, just be in the crowd. And he was in the crowd, and that's how he got into acting. He fitted the stereotype of what they were looking for. Nothing wrong with that. He got a lucky break. He did some more scenes in other films. Again, no speaking parts. And then he got a part in the first Expendables film, well, Sylvester Stallone. The whole cast were action heroes. You know, Jet Li, Dolph Lundgren, loads of stars. He was lucky to get that part, a tiny part in the gang of the Expendables. And he tells this story. He did a bit of filming one day, came home to his motel near the set where they're filming, and he was annoyed. I'm sick of this, they're not treating me right. Why have I got this part? I've got no speaking parts. They're treating me like an idiot. I'm sick of just being a big black guy who gets put in a corner somewhere. And he had this conversation in his head about how he's being mistreated. And suddenly he went, "What are you talking about? You're nobody. Look who you're working with. This is an opportunity for you. Why are you complaining about this situation you found yourself in?" How many other actors in Hollywood would cut off their left arm to be in your position now, working with these mega stars in this mega Stallone film that's bound to be a hit? And he said he went to bed that night thinking of that and woke up next day early and went, "There's a new me on set today." And he turned up on set and he said, "When anybody wants any help, I'm there. When someone says, let's do that again," he's going to go, "I'm up for that." When people say, "We need these boxes moving," he's going to go, I'll help you guys move these boxes." And he started working harder and being a person that other people want to work with. He forgot his attitude. He started being the person other people went, "I like working with Terry because he's got positive energy. When I want to move this catering truck, Terry's there going, I'll help you, mate." And then over the course of that films take 6-9 months to make, I believe. He's then started getting written into bigger parts of the film. He ends up with a solo in the film, which is one of the highlights of the film, where he's got this huge machine gun on his own and he's shooting all the bad guys. And it's one of the highlights of the film. All because he's saying, when he got interviewed, the more I did on set and the more positive I was, the more Stallone wrote me in to the scripts the next day, because these scripts were being written on the hoof. And now there's been 4 films now, and he's done lots of other films. Because he said, I accepted my personal responsibility and I stopped moaning about how bad I was being treated, about how I'm being victimised on a Hollywood set by Sylvester Stallone. And when you look at it, you laugh and you go, you were never being victimised. You had a chance of a lifetime and he took it. And look at him now, because it worked. I've got friends who who do this. I turned up at a friend's house once to borrow a power tool, and he went, I'm annoyed. And what's going on? My boss at work is basically calling me a liar. Why? What's happened? Well, I phoned in sick yesterday because I've told him that my son's had an asthma attack. I've spent all night in the hospital, and I can't go to work next day. And my boss is saying he's going to dock my wages and he may sack me. And I went, that's disgraceful. How is your son? I was fine, there was no asthma attack. So you lied to your boss? Yeah. So what are you moaning about? Well, he doesn't know I was lying. He can't prove I was lying. So therefore, he hates children and he's having a go at me because of that. But he's right. But he can't prove he's right. My kid could have had an asthma attack, but he didn't. But that's not the point, Nick. You're not getting it. That's not the point. He doesn't know for sure he didn't have an asthma attack. So how dare he treat me this way when he can't prove it? But it's true. But that's not the point, Nick. And I had this comment. I left with no power tool, by the way. That is what happens when we don't take our personal responsibility. We then have this delusion, this unreality of where we twist stuff. And it's not helpful. Now let me end on this. So, first of all, what's the antidote to all this? The antidote is, I'm not going to tell you, buy the book. So, let me end on this couple of sentences, and I'll take questions. You have flocks of sheep who love their shepherd, their farmer. The farmer protects them. He keeps the wolves away. He feeds them. He uses his own money to buy feed. He uses his own money to get vets to come down to look after the sheep. But one day that farmer will turn up with a stun gun and a butchering knife. A false sense of security isn't real security. Do not be fooled by handouts, for they always come with a cost. I'll take questions. If you speak loudly, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in there pretty quickly because it's something that's been, I'm in pretty much complete agreement with everything you've said, apart from a little bit towards the end. I don't think a welfare state is as necessary as you'd say, but it's and that's partly because, so I've been on benefits. My parents were on benefits from the mid-40s, and when my father passed away, that created all kinds of psychological issues within my family, and I ended up coming out of work. And I ended up being I'm still having financial difficulties because that period that I came out of work, and it created all kinds of issues. But now I'm back in work, and I sell financial service products, and I'm hoping that some people here might be able to take some advice from this, because there is a solution in this that I think, and I wish I'd known about it when I was going through all those things that I did do in my mid-20s. Because if I'd known that we can insure 60% when we're healthy and young, if I'd known that we can insure 60% of our earnings against things like ill health, which are tied up in a lot of the issues that I think you talked about here, particularly when it comes to things like mental health. If I'd known that we could insure and look after ourselves in that way, when it comes to ill health, I think that could be a huge part of the solutions that could tackle this kind of issue. So I would advise everyone, although like I said, I'm not suggesting that you go through me to do it, but you can tell people while they're young, if you've got family members, nieces and nephews, insure your wages, because you never know when ill health is going to strike and you end up relying on a state handout.
There is no one solution. There's lots of contributed solutions.
But when it comes to taking that kind of ownership, I think that's that could be a huge factor, because people are having to, when you have to, it's not a handout. If you've paid into an insurance policy that covers you for it, that encourages an entirely different mindset than having to sponge off the government, for example. You've earned that because you've taken that risk and you've paid for something, and then you've protected yourself rather than have someone else do it.
Yeah. There was a hand up.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that James has just made actually, and I think that brings up as well, like the NHS for instance. I know it's a completely different issue, but I do think that the NHS forces people into that state of mind where it's like, oh, it's free. So they don't understand, well, it's not free, somebody's paying for it and nothing in life is free.
Yeah.
And I think when it comes to benefits, like, I think we just, well, it sounds bad, but there used to be a time when it was like a shameful thing to be on benefits. And now, so for instance, I work in car insurance, and I'm just temporarily managing a campaign called Motability. And in order to get Motability insurance, you need to be on disability allowance. And I spend all day talking to people who say things to me like, I've got mental health issues, I've got this, I need this right now because I've got, you know, X, because I'm disabled, because of this, because of that, and they're in this attitude, and they've been forced into this mindset of, I deserve X, Y, and Z because I am, you know, not because they work for it, because they are, you know, they tick a certain box. And I think just, you know, I agree with what you said, that it kind of trains this mindset of just sticking your hand out and expecting things and not just going out there and doing it for yourself.
There's something called push and pull factors that I didn't get because I spoke that long, I was going to talk about. So a push factor is when there's a societal response or a government response that pushes you to do something. And then there's also a pull factor, and that's when we talk about the welfare state. So the pull factor, what you're just saying then is the pull factor is, do you know what? If you exaggerate your mental health condition and then you believe it yourself, you get these extra benefits, and we'll give you a car, and we're pulling people into this sort of stuff.
Something that I've noticed is that people, you know, on this particular campaign, Motability, these customers, policyholders, they all use the exact same phrasing.
Yes.
You know, or it's, you know, it's triggered my mental health, or, you know, they all use the same phrases, so they've heard them from somewhere. It's not, you know, their own individual thoughts. They've heard this language somewhere and they're using it as a language. But I think, like James was saying about the insurance, I thought that with the NHS. I mean, it's a different issue, but I just think the NHS needs to go. And I think if people all pay a little bit, however, you know, and it's done on a system where, you know, you pay more if you earn more kind of thing. But if everyone pays into something, I think that's at least a much better start than just having this huge, like, we're a country with an NHS attached, well, no, the other way around, we're an NHS with a small country attached to it now. Like, that's how big the NHS is.
All these things need, when I say I want the welfare state, I don't mean I want the welfare state we've
I know
got
you
now.
don't want a big welfare
Because
state.
it doesn't work, so many NHS doesn't work. All these things need to be re-looked at. Trev?
Yeah, I mean, you finished off basically, before we went to the break.
Yeah.
It says, basically, it's better to give somebody a hand up rather than a hand out.
Yeah.
And you were talking about the push and pull factor.
Yeah.
And I think this is something that reinforces itself. I.e., that is to say, if you're the government, which is easier, to give a hand up or a hand out? It's just like you know, you talk about the person, the homeless person that you met in the street, who wasn't homeless at all, was in fact a drug addict, right? Wasn't homeless. If you were to give them a hand out, you just give them something to eat or give them some money and that's it. Your conscience is clear, you feel good, right? How about a hand up? What's a hand up involved with that person? So in other words, it's 100 times more difficult to give people a hand up than it is to give them a hand out, right? And the hand out culture does exactly what you was talking about. It encourages people, right? So what are the buzzwords? You know, how can I get something for nothing? And it encourages, it's a vicious circle.
Yeah.
So that's what I say, you know, the solution is not as easy as all that, I don't think, you know, in terms of at the level of the government.
Yeah. Well, the solutions are not easy at all. I admit that. You know, I do admit that solutions are not easy. It's very complicated. The governments, the reason why the governments use this, it's easy for the governments to go, it's easier just to give them money. Shut them up, give them money, because things are going well at the moment, not right now, but a couple of years ago, economy's doing well, let's shut them up because the middle classes are quite willing to pay for this because they're not complaining. Let's not fix the problem because no one wants us to fix the problem, and that's why they do that. They write our fellow citizens off. This proportion of the population are useless. Let's just pay them not to starve to death. I'm not up for that. I want them to live their best lives. Gentlemen at the very back. No, yeah.
I was going to ask, how do you tie your observations into the big picture going forward? For example, the title of your book is A Nation of Beggars, right?
The Making of a Beggar.
The Making of a Beggar. Do you think this is a growing problem, something that's set to expand in future?
It's been growing since the 60s. It's been growing since we started doing things like, we feel sorry for single mothers. Let's give them more money. Let's pay them not to have, give them more money if they don't have a man in the house. And then we wonder why single mother families shot up because we financially incentivised them. We did it out of the best intentions. That's why I talk about unintended consequences. We did it to make their lives easier, but what it did was it pulled more people into it because it was financially beneficial. That's what we did. Do you want to follow up?
Yeah. Do you think this is all deliberate going forward?
No, incompetence.
Oh, have you heard of the Great Reset?
Yeah.
I suppose everyone here has heard of it. It seems like a deliberate attempt to make a nation of beggars, to make many nations of beggars. Because what we have is weaponized inflation, which hits ordinary people the hardest. We have a deliberate war on food and energy, which makes both those things more expensive.
Yeah.
And they also know that in future, more and more jobs are going to be automated. So they're pushing us towards this nation of beggars situation on the one hand, and we have technology that's going to do it anyway. So
I get that.
So it's crucial for them to set up some kind of guardrail, some kind of control mechanism that will keep them in power when all of this comes to a head. And we have a lot of unemployed people and a lot of people who can't pay for anything.
And then the whole thing collapses, and then we turn into Mogadishu.
Psychology already gone mainstream through the population. So I think that ties into it.
Once you've worked in government and you've seen the level of incompetence, it stops you believing in, for me, any conspiracies or the EWEF. I've worked in government. I've seen the base incompetence. So everything I see, I always put down to incompetence mainly. Gentleman in the front, yeah, and then we'll go to.
I just wanted to point out, it's always been around since all of history.
Yeah.
So basically in the 1800s, the English Romantic poet William Blake, he walked through a social housing area and he remarked that you could see on the people's faces kind of what you were saying about the people on DHS, that there's something wrong with their spirit or with the way with their face because they have learned helplessness. And he wrote a poem about it, and the line that I remember is mind-forged manacles. He said these people have kind of mind-forged manacles, so they've chains. They've changed. They've enslaved themselves. So it's always been around. But I guess at his day, the solution was this revival in Victorian morality, which happened. So maybe that will happen again in the next few decades, hopefully.
It will. The things come in cycles, and our progressive, carefree society at the moment will end up coming back to a more conservative, restrictive, and this will be done socially because we'll all start agreeing with it. Things swing, and we're waiting for the swing to come back. This gentleman. Yeah.
It does take that culture because you have through like if your whole family have been on benefits, it's kind of like they get this mindset, so their peers, and it's like a subculture of well, everyone else is on it, so and it's like it's been drummed into you. So you've got to look at it at a base level to change that thinking.
Yeah.
And it's because like you said, they've all got like this story that they have, but you've got to change it, and that's quite complicated.
It can be, I don't blame the people for taking the handouts. If you said to me now, the bar downstairs, Nick, you can get your pint for £6, or there's a state reduced pint that tastes almost the same at £2.50. I'm buying the £2.50 one. So when you incentivise people, as humans, we will go for a lot of us will go for the incentivised one because it's cheaper, it makes sense, I get bigger bang for buck, I've got more money. So I'm not criticising the people for doing it because we've made the path easy for them to pick the wrong solution. What we need to do is create the social structure and a society where we start incentivising the right choices for them.
You need to think like you need to think like, well, okay, so basically what you're saying is, people need to think more. It's like the government's saying, well, I have this, but they don't think about like, well, they don't think, well, everyone else is giving money so that I can get it for free, and they're not thinking about like this. It's like a kind of, it breeds it. But it's breeding negativity because you're not working for that, so you have no sense, and like, that's just given to you for free, so you can just get more. It's like tugging at that. Oh, what else is it going to get me?
Yeah, and I don't blame people for that. The lady here, and I'll come to you, Bob.
Childcare in the UK is very expensive.
Yep.
In France, it's a lot cheaper, but obviously it's state subsidised.
Yeah.
But it makes it much easier, for example, for single mothers or even just simply for parents to go to work. And isn't this sort of solution? You know, it's incentivising people. And also it's, like here, as I understand, you get your child benefit for your first 2 children, and after that you don't. It's almost as if in this country they're trying to discourage people from having children because of childcare costs. Well, I understand why.
Yeah.
They'll say, I think maybe this childcare is a form of solution. You know, it's
Childcare.
it's a hand up. You know,
Mothers at home with their children. We need to have mothers at home with their children. not
yeah, but
back
I mean,
there.
I think
Childcare is one of those things, as in, why should I pay for your child, for you to go? Why as a taxpayer should I pay for you to have cheaper childcare?
Yeah, but there again, but then they can go to work. But then they won't work and pay tax.
They can go to work, which I would argue has a detrimental effect on the children. So we're bringing up slightly less positive citizens because they're not having that maternal bond being brought up for several years. We're dumping them on childminders. If we wanted to reduce the cost of childcare, we then remove the restrictions that's keeping up childcare that high. So that would be one thing we could do, is remove all the state rules they've got to follow. That's what's making childcare so high. So we could reduce the bureaucracy of having that. That would take the cost down. But for me, if we're looking, if you want to have children, then you need to plan ahead and make sure you can afford to have children, that you have a husband in the house if you're a woman. If you're a man, you need to make sure I don't mind who stays at home, and this is not me being sexist, someone has to stay at home to raise that child, because no one is going to put the love, affection and spark into a child more than the parent is. That's not to say external people can't have an influence, because I'm a granddad. I have a huge influence on my granddaughter, but I'm never a replacement for her dad or her mum. But childcare is something we do need to look at. And why is it so expensive? I agree with that. Why is it so expensive in our country? And it's the rules and regulations that make it so expensive.
But you've got the other side. I mean, unless it's changed. I mean, I was a single parent for a little while, decades ago, and I didn't do it for very long. But when I didn't, at that stage, my children were very young. I could have said, "Listen, I've got a 17-year-old child at school. I can't work."
Yep.
You know, 17. You can't do that in France.
Yeah. You can't do that here anymore now. The age limit now is something like, once your child reaches 10 or whatever now, you're now forced into work by the British government now if you're single.
Yeah, but I still think it's better to encourage people to go out to work, you know. And you're talking about, you know, you've got to plan to have a child. People do get pregnant. You know,
most people don't plan when they get pregnant. I agree with that.
Sometimes it doesn't work.
No, exactly. I agree
you know,
with that.
It's like, I mean, I've got nothing against abortion.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, it's all sometimes things happen, you know.
Yeah.
So,
most child have
but
plans.
children are our wealth. It's the nation's wealth. We need children.
We need children.
Yeah, we need
But we need parents at home raising their children.
Well, and so I don't agree on that. I think sort of, you know, because I think, you know,
No, we are one parent should definitely say.
Oh, sorry, Lindsay, then Bob.
Yeah, Nick, sorry, two-part question, I
Yeah.
think. So, firstly, do you think the current culture of kind of the establishment talking about things like mental health and be kind and that sort of is encouraging the making of beggars? And the second part is, what's the answer to stop us making beggars?
Be kind, be compassionate, pink and fluffy is making beggars. It's turning us all into beggars. And the people who have that narrative, from my experience, are not doing it for the best intentions of the individuals that say they're doing it for. So again, let's go back to people sat on the streets, the people who give them, you know, a meal deal. I'm a city centre worker. Here you go, mate, outside Tesco's tomorrow morning. Here's a, well, it's not £2.50 anymore now, it's like $3.99 meal deal. Here's a meal deal, mate. Mate, you know, you've got a cheese and ham sandwich, a can of Coke and a Mars bar. There you go, I've now sorted you out. Your life is bound to be better now. All that's happened there is that individual now may eat it. So let's say they eat it, because they're a bit peckish, so they eat it. They now don't need to go to the homeless centre in the gay village or next or just outside the city centre at the beginning of Cheetah Mill, the brief centre. They don't need to go there anymore now for a hot meal. Like they could have sat at a table with a knife and fork and felt human, not sat on a corner like a rat eating out of a bag. So they could go to that centre if they'd not eaten. That's where the social workers, support workers could sit with them over many. Don't forget, you don't solve someone's problem over one meal. It takes weeks and months, but at least we've got them in the building. People can sit with them. What are your problems? How do you end up here? What can we do for you? What do you want? And we can start picking away at their problems to move them into something better. So every time a Be Kind, Be Compassionate Facebook group gives someone a meal deal, a sandwich, all they've done is stop that person getting the help and support that day. You've just put them behind the day. It's made you feel wonderful, by the way. You're now feeling, you're just like Nelson Mandela. You're for the people, but you've not helped anyone, you've just helped yourself. And the second part of the question is, what's the solution to this?
Yeah.
The solution is the last chapter of my book. But the solution really is, we need as a nation to start to understand how complicated our social problems are. We need to stop looking for quick, simple fixes to extremely complicated problems. Because we do have problems. We've all got problems. But if they were simple to fix, we wouldn't have them. We had problems, we solved them, because they were the simple problems. The problems that are left with now are complicated. And we need to admit it takes hard work and toil. It takes hard work and toil to solve those problems. And the solutions are not going to be pink and fluffy. That's why I disagree with the woke. The woke's aim, I agree with, a better world, a utopia, where we all get along, there's no wars, there's no poverty, there's no racism. I agree with the woke on all those things. What I disagree with is having a badge saying I'm against evil is going to contribute to that. No, it's not. Someone's got to do the hard work, the unpopular work. We don't have politicians who want to do that anymore. Our politicians are only working on a 3-4 year cycle. What can I do now that looks good, that gets me elected in 3 years' time? Doing something now that improves the country 20, 30 years from now, I don't care about, because I won't be in office and I won't get the rewards. That's why we have an energy crisis today. Because 20 years ago, our politicians didn't do what needed to be done for us to have a better life today, because they wanted rewards immediately to get elected again. That's the difference between a career politician and a statesperson. A statesperson goes, I'm doing these things to improve the country, and I don't care if you vote me out, because this is the right thing to do for the future. A career politician goes, what would you like me to do so you vote me in again in 3 years' time? That's the difference, and that's why we have these problems. Follow up and I'll come to you, Trev.
I was just going to say what you mentioned about patriotism earlier, that you think
Yep.
you need more patriotism. I agree, but could you just expand on that? And
What I mean by patriotism is we've got to a stage in our country, it's been going on for decades, probably since the Second World War onwards. There's a feeling in our country that we're not a good country. There's a feeling in our country that we're not a good people. And it's untrue. And having that feeling damages the country. It damages the psyche of the country. When I mean patriotism, I don't mean like a Nazi Germany, let's have military parades. And no. I mean a country where we say as a nation,
Well, we look after each other.
aren't we great? Look at what we've done. Look at what we've exported around the world. We've had, as a small country, we've had one of the biggest impacts on the world has ever seen. We did some bad things, but who doesn't do bad things? But we did more good things than bad things. And I'm tired of people always criticising us. I can handle foreigners criticising us. Well, that's their opinion. They're entitled to their opinion. I'm sick of people just like me, born in this country, who have reaped all the rewards of this country, who then go, this country's shit. And it's like, if you felt like that, then go live somewhere else, because you're not going to, because we've got 1 million immigrants trying to sneak in the country every day because they think this country is amazing.
Yeah.
You judge a country by how many people are literally dying to get out and how many people are literally dying to get in. And on that score, dying to get out is 0. Dying to get in, let's look at the deaths in the Channel, people trying to get here. People suffocating in lorries coming over from Cali, in the back of lorries suffocating. They're the people who are dying to get in here compared to 0 of dying to get out, because no one's dying to get out. Trev, and then I'll what time is it now, sir? 10 after 4. I'm happy going if people are still willing to ask questions. Trev, you got a follow up?
Yeah. I mean, to add insult to injury, in terms of what you were talking about before, about the vicious circle, people taking advantage of the handouts, and the government, just because it's easier, they'll just give loads of money out, and everybody's happy, right?
The problem is no one's happy.
Yeah, no, I know. Yeah. But to add to that, I think, and also intersects with what you're saying about patriotism and whether the country's any good or not, right? Is that people are being taught to be victims.
Yeah.
Right? That doesn't help at all, right? On any of it. It doesn't help on any of it. If you're taught to be a victim, right, then you will want handouts. Yeah. You will think you deserve handouts, right? You will think you deserve. Anytime you've got a problem, it's up to somebody else or the government to fix it. I can see that, and people are being taught this in schools, and at the same time, being taught that the country's evil. Right? That really pisses me off. Right? Only because I used to think that myself at one time. Believe it or not. He's going to say something else.
Yeah. We'll go for this lady here, and then last question for you.
Yeah, in response to you, what if that was all being done deliberately? It's not. Because have people heard of Build Back Better?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So the destroying society, culture, one way of life.
I didn't want to go that far.
Yeah. There's always, and always has been, and always will be, nefarious people in society who are normally the part of the dark.
Good. Most people are good, but the few.
No, but there's always nefarious people in society who are either psychopathic or Machiavellian, and these traits are called the dark triad traits, who are always looking to destroy, always looking at the negativity, because if I can't, the best thing I can do is this. My favourite quote of all time is from Genghis Khan. And Genghis Khan said, "It's not enough that I should succeed, but that everybody else should fail." They're the type of people who the Build Back Better. It's not that they want to be just successful, but everybody else must fail, because that is part of their dark triad character.
Because the other bit was the 15-minute cities.
Yeah.
So there was a protest in Oxford yesterday, big thousands of people. But the idea is that would solve everything, because we'll all be looked after as long as we do as we're told.
Yeah. A simple solution to a very complicated issue. Don't worry about 15-minute cities, don't worry about all these things. They're never going to happen. They're already falling apart now. These people have had it their way for so long. Just like Nicola Sturgeon, gone. Polls out today, Mayor of London, over 50% of people think he should resign today. He's gone next election. You can push so far, and the British people are so tolerant and so lackadaisy sometimes. We go away with that, and all of a sudden there's a line crossed and they're gone. Don't worry about things like that, because they're not going to come to fruition. I really don't think they are. Last question.
So I don't know if there's a question in it, but you mentioned at one point that there's narratives as well in the media. You presented some examples, Hollywood movies, for example. The victim narrative goes back a lot deeper than that a lot of those stories are based on. And I think arguably it's a major part of the Christian narrative. The suffering and the hardship that Jesus went through, that kind of thing. And how we see victimhood and sacrifice on that level, and how that influences narratives, Hollywood narratives, media narratives. So I mean that's going to make it extremely difficult. If I was a politician who wanted to say, these are the pragmatic and realistic solutions for that, and risk the fact that, because we've also identified that our form of democracy is part of the issue as well, because that temporal. You're only in office. What can I do that looks good to get me in office for the next 4 years?
Short-termism.
There's no real incentive for a decent politician who's up against a hostile media that's going to present these victimhood narratives, as well as a democratic situation where that encourages temporary solutions, other than something that would promote that would be something along the lines of like a fascist government.
Who's to blame for that?
You don't want to know who I think is to blame for that.
I'll tell you who's to blame for it. We are. We live in
Rob knows.
We live in
agrees that you don't want to know.
We live in a democracy. A democracy always gets the politicians it deserves.
I agree with you to an extent, because it is really frustrating that people will just spend their Saturday at the traffic centre as opposed to doing something like going to a town meeting or something. Yeah. But then on the other hand as well, there are some things that are so out of our control because certain people have so much power. So for instance, just the financial system, there's certain things that are just so out of our control that you kind of almost can't blame people for just kind of thinking, okay, well, I'm just going to live my life.
No, I disagree. Everything is in our control. They may be very difficult, but most people are sheep. Let's admit that most people are sheep and will do as they're told, and will just follow whatever thinks to be popular at the moment. So it only takes something like 3.5% of the population to be able to change the direction of that population if they're organised and if they know what they want. 3.5%. But that only happens, but we're getting there now, it only happens when you don't live in good times. When you live in good times, it's always, oh, what's the problem? Oh, my life's good. Oh, we've now hit some bad times and things may get worse. We're now seeing a backlash now on the illegal immigrants living in hotels. We're now seeing people with a backlash because they're going, I'm struggling. It isn't a good life anymore now. And once we get away from that good life, which we are now, people will start changing their opinions. Politicians are always a couple of years behind the curve, because don't forget, they want to be elected again. And once they hear us being unhappy, they will change if we're voting for change. But it's very difficult. I agree, it's difficult, but it's always in our hands if we can mobilise. Right, I'm willing to talk to people. I'm going to stay a bit longer. I'm willing to talk to people, but I think we need to close to it.
All right, let's give it up. Thank you.